In the beginning, the laws of the universe established order and complexity with uncanny precision. Of this, there is no question. For early humanity, it was clear that such a universe could only be described as a product of divinity. Before we could formally describe nature's rules, the intuitive answer was obvious. Our world was engineered by supreme intelligence. That belief bore early religion. Across nearly every culture, complexity was inseparable from divinity, and divinity from sacrifice. Power followed the same logic. Rulers claimed legitimacy, but not through mandate, but metaphysics, portraying themselves as demigods to justify hierarchy over servants and subjects. When confronted with apparent immorality or error, the elite would eschew a systematic defense and instead assert that their position was established by God. The clergy did it to Galileo, but this appeal to God is hardly limited to believers. Einstein, who was somewhere between an agnostic and an atheist, famously complained against quantum theory that God does not play dice with the universe. In both cases, this use of God's name violates a central tenet in the Hebrew Bible. Invoking God to defend an idea is vanity. If logic and evidence are not enough, then perhaps you're just wrong. Millennia ago, the shared early model of the divine was simple and transactional. Gods could be influenced through sacrifice, aromas, animals, even humans. These gods, in essence, responded to tribute. They were bribable, immoral, and demanded blood. They were, in other words, not unlike their creation. God was made in the image of humanity, not humanity in the image of God. Nowhere was this more obvious than at the horrific extreme where children were burned alive in exchange for divine favor. This is the baseline for humanity, and escape was not possible without a better notion of God. In the southern Levant 3,000 to 5,000 years ago, something changed. Something that rewired the relationship between humans and the creator of the universe. In developed civilizations like ancient Egypt, divinity had been politically weaponized. Gods validated kings and pharaohs, and kingship validated ownership, justifying the divide between masters and slaves. The divine served the elite, and so it's no surprise that the elite had no incentive to articulate a more equitable view of God. Instead, this transformative idea came from the slaves, that the order woven into the universe wasn't the product of a committee of quarrelsome gods. It was a signature of one mind, one intellect, one source, one authority that ruled over elites and deletes, aristocracy and untouchables, peasants and kings. If this equanimity wasn't established in life, it was in death, the great equalizer, an event which cannot be avoided by bribe or wealth or dignity or influence, the place everyone is bound for, presidents and plumbers. Monotheistic ideas gradually dominated the Near East. It arrived many millennia before modern physics converged on more or less the same conclusion. Today, scientists recognize that the diverse laws of nature reduce, at their roots, to a single universal law, collapsing into a sole point of origin that expresses itself with a variety of faces, a monolith of everything that exists expressed in multiple forms. The religion that preceded this crystallized into Judaism, the source code of the world's major monotheistic systems. Christianity incorporates the Hebrew Bible into its canon in full, carrying those scriptures forward while developing a distinct theological expression. Islam likewise includes many of the same central figures, Abraham, Ishmael, Moses, and echoes overlapping narratives reframed with its own emphasis and doctrinal aims. These faiths are classified by scholars as Abrahamic religions, not because of coincidental resemblance, but because they share a demonstrable lineage of theological ancestry. Many of the conceptual attributes associated with the Hebrew Yahweh are carried forward into the Quranic depiction of Allah. While their portrayals are not identical, the connection is historically and theologically traceable. Across all three traditions, a common moral architecture emerges. Care for the poor, show generosity to those in need, and live under accountability to a universal moral law. Their expressions differ, yet their expectations converge with notable clarity. In this worldview, humanity is judged not by wealth, status, or power, but by faithfulness and devotion to the Creator. The divine cannot be bribed because human beings possess nothing that could add value to the infinite. Christianity uniquely resolves what these traditions collectively imply. A created being cannot justify themselves before the Creator by their own merit. Standing before the author of the universe and of life itself, the human person has nothing to present in self-defense. The only viable posture is confession, acknowledging God rather than attempting to bargain with him, and accepting divine mercy on the Creator's terms, not humanity's. This process brought sharp relief to what had preceded it. In Egypt, rulers fused gods with government to sanctify power. As a select group of slaves fled Pharaoh towards the Red Sea, their leader articulated a new idea that there was only one God who gave no preference for ruler over servant. Pharaoh was no more an authority than his most despised slave. He was as inferior to God as his cattle, which had been slaughtered by hail, and his soldiers, who would be slaughtered by rushing waters. It's the sort of thing that establishes an idea forever, and so it has. The mistreatment of widows and orphans, two of the weakest groups in antiquity, is one of the most consistently condemned actions that provokes the anger of Yahweh in the Hebrew Bible. Christianity extends this ethic further, applying mercy even to adversaries through the command to turn the other cheek. Yet it also incorporates self-defense, as Jesus instructed his followers to carry a sword, both as a symbol and as an instrument. You might assume the violence of Islamic extremism reflects a total break from Judeo-Christian ethics, but in the Quran, warfare is permitted only in response to aggression, oppression, or injustice. Unsurprisingly for this reason, killing women, children, and the elderly is explicitly prohibited. Terrorists twist themselves into pretzels, justifying indiscriminate attacks which violate this principle by advancing ideas that apostasy or disbelief is punishable by death, or that in democratic communities, the election process makes all citizens into combatants with no explanation for how children are guilty in either scenario. Writ large, terrorism is not consistent with many verses in the Quran. Still, small doctrinal differences accumulate into the concept of jihad, an ethic fundamentally at odds with turning the other cheek, in the same way the Hebrew ethic of an eye for an eye is. So much of the modern history of Israel and Palestine is described in this one belief shared among two ethnic groups locked in decades-long struggle. It should go without saying that we shouldn't confuse these religions as pluralist or interchangeable just for the shared ideas about a singular creator. Their similarities don't indicate syncretism, they reflect common truth. Over millennia, billions have converted and confessed the attributes of a unified divine mind through parallel ancestral traditions. The characteristics of God, singular, eternal, creative, relational, and authoritative, were fully articulated 3,000 years ago in early Southern Levant theology. No more concise or preferred system has replaced or surpassed it. This persistence is striking. Despite seismic shifts in technology, cultural revolutions, government, and scientific understanding, the idea of one eternal creator has continued, relatively unabated. In a sense, monotheism functions as a subjective reflection of mathematical law, enduring, replicable, and resistant to overthrow. Its longevity suggests something deeper, that the universe itself has impressed those attributes to be recognizable by intelligent biological organisms on Earth. The divine wasn't revised by civilization. Civilization recognized what was already there. The universe displays the pattern, humanity comprehends it, and then writes a book. We can broaden the lens here. Hinduism and Buddhism, the world's other major religious views, are split by a degree somewhere between the gaps of Protestantism and Catholicism and the wider chasm between Christianity and Judaism. These religions were formalized only a few centuries after Judaism in the mid-1st millennium BCE, and unlike the monotheisms rooted in the southern Levant, they emerged in ancient India. As in the Judeo tradition, the human duty to moral behavior is a central feature of Hinduism and Buddhism. While Hinduism includes belief in a singular creator, Buddhism rejects the notion of an all-powerful creator God. In Buddhism, the path to righteousness is one of self-empowerment and liberation from suffering through the nurturing of loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. Individuals who nurture these states can obtain godlike qualities. The great dilemma is that some form of revelation is required to obtain this divine knowledge, while divine revelation is rejected by Buddha. Instead, it is a result of meditation, which is validated by individual experience. Knowledge is discovered, practiced, tested, and transmitted like a disciplined contemplative science. This suffers from the same difficult questions as scientific-based atheism does. If intellectual pursuits are established by observation of the universe, what does this say about the source of the universe? How can intellect be nurtured by observations of sources not established by intellect? A Buddhist, much like an atheist, will stop the conversation with an a priori claim. that the universe is not made to establish truth, it simply does, and there's no more to it than that. Perhaps for this reason, monotheism is not uncommon in the broader philosophic traditions of India. Only a few centuries after Judaism arose in the southern Levant, a parallel idea took shape in ancient India, the concept of one ultimate singular source behind all existence. In Hinduism, that source is Brahman, the supreme, infinite, and formless ground of being, the origin of all reality. Creation is not an event from Brahman so much as an expression of Brahman. Life, matter, and the cosmos, faces of a universal current. Every occupant of the universe becomes, in a sense, a vessel sailing the Abrahamic tide. This is monotheism and pantheism merged. Brahman is singular, yet worship is expressed through many forms. Vishnu, Shiva, the divine feminine, the Devi. There are echoes here of the Christian idea of God as one in essence expressed in multiple persons, but we shouldn't confuse resemblance for replication. The particulars are critically different. For instance, Brahman is understood to permeate everything, including every human being. Within this all-in-one framework, deities are distinct, yet participation is universal. Each consciousness a localized lens of the infinite. In contrast, in Christianity, God created everything, heavens, earth, life, and law, and endowed creation itself with free will. For this reason, stars remain fixed and reliable, life multiplies and diversifies, and humanity is accountable for its choices. The divine spoke the world into existence, but did not dissolve into it. The universe is intentional, the relationship personal, the law authoritative, accountability moral, and identity is real and not metaphysical. The three forms of God are mission-oriented and communicative. The Father, Yahweh, who is authoritative, the Son, Christ, who is a redeemer, and the Spirit is the one who guides. In the mid-first millennium BCE, the moral philosophic traditions of India were formalized. They carried forward the same core expectation found in Judaism: defend the weak, uphold moral duty, and live righteously within the universal order. Later still, centuries after these ideas matured, and at roughly the same era as the Protestant Reformation, Sikhism arose in India, recognizing a singular God, Ik Onkar, the eternal one beyond time, without form. Even in philosophic religions, a return to monotheistic thinking is never far away. While Indian and Islamic religions spread abroad in a limited fashion, most visibly into Southeast Asia, Judeo-Christianity spread across the remainder of the world. The trajectories look similar from altitude, but not on the ground. There is an impressive distinction between Judaism and Christianity here. Christianity indoctrinated into diverse cultures, languages, and traditions with ease. Judaism did not. Judaism held its line within a core ethnic identity, an event singularly unique in the human history for its resistance to cultural, philosophical, and genetic dilution. Intermarriage is prohibited in the Hebrew Bible, and as a result, modern Jewish populations remain genetically linked to Levantine ancestors from the era of David and Solomon. There is no other example in human history of a community dispersed for millennia who preserved their identity with this level of continuity. There isn't even a good example of one that managed to sustain such conditions for a century. After the final destruction of Jerusalem, 40 years after the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, Jewish communities were scattered. Dispersion wasn't new for Israel, but this one would endure nearly 2,000 years. And in all those centuries, something remarkably held. Judaism refused synchronization. Empires shifted, borders dissolved, languages evolved, rulers rose and fell around them. The dark skin of Middle Eastern Hebrews turned pale in the winter dim of northern latitudes, yet Jewish communities remained culturally independent, socially distinct, and persistently unmixed. They suffered perpetual persecution for it, but never surrendered the line, never synchronized, never dissolved into the surrounding world, and never intermarried. It is the most astonishing case of continuity in human history, not isolation by geography, but by conviction. They obstinately refused to align to the whims of the world around them, often at great cost. The final offense was bearskin, famished, abused, and fed into Nazi ovens in places like Auschwitz. And so it was, thousands of years after the Bible first predicted exile and then return to Jerusalem, and that with the help of Gentile nations, that Israel was reestablished through Western fiat as a Jewish colony. Nostradamus, eat your heart out. As it relates to cultural and economic impact, there is no real dispute that Judeo-Christianity has produced the freest, most prolific cultures. Its earliest strongholds were first in Europe and later in North America, today's economic powerhouses, particularly on a per capita basis. These regions also promote broad ethnic, gender, and civic equality, especially when compared to non-Judeo-Christian historic communities. Contrast that with others. Caste systems remain a deeply troubling feature of Indian communities. Those systems were either rejected by implication in Judaism or directly overturned in Christian scripture, unlocking economic participation from entire classes that had been written out of input for millennia. Likewise, while women's rights are heavily restricted in Sharia law, both the Hebrew and Christian Bibles repeatedly catalog consequential contributions by women. Now, no scripture states full equality between men and women outright, but between Judaism and Christianity, the implication grew increasingly clear. God values both sexes on the same moral scale. And that implication mattered. It unleashed whole populations, especially women, into education, labor, ownership, and economic output. It wasn't a smack-in-the-face revolution of wording. It was far more effective than that. It was a revolution of implication, the only sort that has any shot of breaking through the intransigence of human customs. An implication enough to multiply human freedom, expand input, and unlock the productive power of billions who had never before been permitted a seat at the table. All of this is to say that, measured in worldly terms, Judeo-Christian values have objectively exceeded every other system in producing dominant economic communities. Judaism has persisted, almost unbelievably, across persecutions measured in millennia. Christianity, by contrast, proliferated, crossing cultures, customs, languages, and continents. The two religions impressive and diametrically opposed. Unalterable, permanent in the form of Judaism, effusive with open arms in the case of Christianity. The core language of human morality is shared across the major world religions, a universal ethic C.S. Lewis once called the Tao in his seminal lecture, The Abolition of Man. But the differences, sometimes small, sometimes subtle, were not small in consequence. Those doctrinal edges and inflections shape civilizations. They formed cultures, governments, economies, and moral instincts. And they carried implications outward into the character of nations and communities that embraced them. While the major religions share a center, their circumference differs, the edge along which civilizations ride, divide, flourish, or fall. To the degree that socioeconomic fortunes foretell truth, Judeo-Christian ethics stands apart. Now, this is a large subject, and so I've broken it up into 3 sections and 3 separate videos. In the next video, I'll discuss a comparably recent development of atheism and agnosticism, while in the final video, I'll dive into the troubling split between Christian thinking and scientific discovery that accompanied Galileo's articulation of heliocentrism and his ultimate condemnation as a heretic and exile by the hand of Pope Urban VIII. Until next time, God bless and stay safe.